Wayne Bojo Nandaway Maganaduk, Nitsa Magabo Indigo, Daryl Buzo Dijnikaz, Namedo Dem, Kitagan ZB Donjaba, Ojibwe Nishna Bay now. Good morning, everyone. My name is Daryl Buzo, and I'm from the Garden River First Nation. I'd often listen to my grandmother speaking all the time because she had visitors, and she always spoke Ojibwe in the house. Well, it's probably around 1973, 74 that we started acquiring our language back, and that was through a youth group that we had. It was called the Kweetnung Institute Youth Group. And sadly, the gentleman that was our first teacher passed away last week. His name was Charlie Pine. But he introduced us to language, and from there, moving forward, I learned as much as I could throughout the years.
Was fluent?
Absolutely. My grandmother was, she was originally from Serpent River First Nation, but she married into the Garden River First Nation. She married our grandfather. And and she has been like the center of our family throughout the years. My mother, Dorothy, and my dad, Eli, both from Garden River. My dad's parents were from Garden River. My grandfather was a fisherman. That was his livelihood, and he was also a surveyor at one time. And what I found out really remarkable about my grandfather, on my dad's side, his name was Eli, is that he spoke 4 languages. He spoke English, he spoke French, he spoke Ojibwe, and I later found out that he also spoke Cree. And he learned Cree from helping them do survey lines in the north. And both my grandparents were just loving people, right? Loving people. And you'd never know that poverty existed because we were self-sustaining, huge gardens. My grandfather on my dad's side and my dad were both trappers and hunters, and that's what really sustained us throughout the years. So you didn't see poverty, but it was there for sure, right? I mean, the material things that most people had, we didn't have, but we didn't go without. I can't say that they were influenced by residential school because neither my mother nor my dad are day school survivors. Residential school survivors. They are day school survivors, but you could certainly tell during their lifetime how the worldview change of our people, right, and the influence of the outside world had on our community, and that impacted us as well as children. So in my life is that I was. It's a funny story, right? Is that usually when it's other people, other governments, other agencies that remove you from your community, I was removed from my aunt and my uncle. They came and they asked me if I would move with them to Timmins because they seen of some of the dangers that existed for me growing up, and I did. So I went to high school in Timmins. I stayed with my aunt and my uncle, and my uncle was Grand Chief Andrew Rickard, who was the founding chief of Grand Council Treaty Number 9 at the time, which is Nishnawbe Ski Nation, and my aunt was Jackie, and they took care of me very well. And I got to see the organization, its birth to where it is today. And I never forget about it, right? And having that opportunity to sit at the breakfast table with my uncle and just to see his determination, right? So they took me to Timmins, and I lived there for a while. And I actually worked for the organization later on. I became a treaty researcher and a community development worker for a number of years, and got to travel to all remote communities in the north, which I really, really enjoyed. But what was more meaningful for me was the friendships that I developed in the communities. And they're long-standing, and they remain that today. And so when I come to assemblies, it's good to reacquaint myself with all those friendships that I developed over the many, many years. And I'm happy to see people when I'm there. Later on, I moved back to Garden River, and I became I was hired as the first community development, comprehensive community development worker, in which Garden River was making this transition, right? And this was how I viewed it, is it modernizing the community. People didn't have running water, nor did we have indoor toilets. There was no such thing as having a master plan in terms of how we wanted, our different homes built. And I was part of that whole process, right, in modernizing the community. And again, it was led by my uncle in the community, who was Ron Busnell, Chief Ron Busnell, who gave me this opportunity. And again, just another wonderful experience to see the transformation of a community of poverty move towards a place where the new development is going to happen, and being very creative and innovative to want to do better for the community. And so therefore, one morning people turned the taps on and they had running water, right? Nor did they have to go to the outhouse. And that was a huge, huge transition for our people, right? And in some ways, cultural shock as well, right? Because that's not what we're accustomed to. The luxuries that other people had, finally there was some in our communities. So I really, really enjoyed that. And I worked in different capacities in Garden River. The last one I had was I was the manager of our economic community development program. We constructed about 150 homes in the community. We did a lot of work. We had a forestry plan. We also helped out in the creation of the daycare center and our gaming facility and our recreation building as well. So I was just happy to be part of just a really forward-looking team to be able to create all the development. And I was also given an opportunity by Garden River First Nation to sit on the Shingwauk Education Trust. And the Shingwauk Education Trust was a really poor place to be because it had absolutely no money. We had some assets, but aside from that, we were poor, right? But the idea of the Shingwauk Education Trust was to restore and reclaim Chief Shingwauk's vision of Kanoma Gegamika Teaching Lodge, right? And understanding that what I was able to do was to recruit a couple of really visionaries, that being former Chief Jerry Fontaine from Seguin in Manitoba, and Eddie Betten-Benet Bodwewiden from the Three Fires Confederacy. And we brought Jerry in to develop the curriculum, and Eddie came in to teach it. And it was all from the Anishinaabe worldview, beginning from the creation story, onward and moving forward. And it was remarkable. It was remarkable because we started out with maybe 8 students, and we ended up with 3 classes, first, second, and third year classes, right, in Anishinaabe studies. And our classrooms were full. And a funny thing about that as well is that a lot of international students joined our classes as well, so much so that it was over-capped, right? So what we did is that because you didn't want to leave anybody behind, we moved students from first year to third year, and those who didn't get the third year, we moved them back down to the second year, so everybody got the full teachings of Anishinaabe studies. And to stand with them at convocation was just a happy moment. Yeah. And from that, what I was able to do is that, again, working with Eddie and Jerry and others, is that the idea of actually having a place where we could have this facility. And where the Shingwauk Education Trust is located is on a former site of Shingwauk Indian Residential School, right? Which is today Algoma University, a post-secondary institute, mainstream. They received their charter in the early 2000s, and their charter was contingent upon Shingwauk Education Trust giving their approval. And you'll see within that legislation as well is a piece about cross-cultural education, and that was our part in making sure that, it's still giving recognition to the vision of Chief Shingwak. But the idea of having our own Kanomaa-Gigimik, our own teaching lodge, is very, very important, right? And tangible places are important to people. Well, on this side of the street, you could see the old residential school. We wanted to build a new memory for our people. So what I did is I approached the mayor of the city. I approached the incoming MP. I lobbied and shared Chief Shingwak's vision as much as I could, and the idea behind it and how important it was, not just for our people, but for the region as well. And spin it in terms of how people could understand. So there was economic benefits, right? Bring students and they'll be in your restaurants, they'll be in your hotels, they'll buy food and certain on and on, right? So there are certainly economic benefits along with the educational piece as well. And I worked hard. And I worked hard with many people. And we were asked to submit an application. And I brought in a team of people, and we were given literally 3 days to fill this application in, right? Because it was a new MP that called me, Terry Sheen, and said, look, here's an opportunity, send me your application. And so with all of our friends, we did that, and we submitted for $5.1 million. And shortly thereafter, I received a call, and again, because of protocols, you can't tell anybody, but we were told our application was successful. And I stood on stage with Algoma University, Sioux College, and others. It was a proud moment because they all received funding as well, right? But ours was the highest, right? Ours was the highest. And I was happy about that. So that was a great moment, right? Shortly thereafter, I got a call again from our MP, and he says, look, we'd like you to submit another application, because our initial budget was for $10 million. And so we submitted the second application. And to me, this is just it's a signal, right? It's that we have some money here for you, so you need to apply. And we did, and we received another $5.1 million, bringing it up to over $10 million. So that was just a profound moment in all of us, because we knew that the work that we were doing, people were receiving it in a good way. And so today, you'll see a structure across from Shingwak Indian Residential School, which we call Shingwak Kanomaa-Gigimik, the Discovery Center. It's well over $12 million, and a lot of work, right? A lot of work from many people. And my philosophy behind that is that what I learned from my good friend Eddie and Jerry, and the teachings from my grandmother, is that never give up. Never, right? If you believe in something, never. So so there's a place for our people. State of the art. Yes. Yeah, and I think that's an very important question, because it's distorted, right? It's really distorted in terms of the vision that he had for his teaching wigwam for his people, right? People think and assume that Chief Shingwak's vision was about residential schools, and it wasn't, right? Chief Shingwak was a visionary. He was a leader. He was a Medewan person. He was a Wabano person, and he had all of these gifts that he had with him. But he also saw the future, right? And he saw that things are changing quickly and rapidly for his people, coming out of the War of 1812, and knowing that our position as allies with the British were diminishing. The fur trade economy was diminishing, and our way of life was being impacted as well. And Chief Shingwak saw that, and so he knew that acquiring a new way of learning would help us people into the future, right? Modernizing who we are, so that we're not stuck where we are, right? But equally, even more important to that teaching lodge was that it was also include who we are, meaning our language, our culture, and our traditions, right? We should never lose that. So that was his idea, right? Is to bring both of those two worlds together. And to have that vision, right, at that moment in time, people just don't understand it, right? And what Chief Shingwak did to receive that vision, he fasted for 10 days, right? And if you go without food and water for one day, it's a challenge, right? And Chief Shingwak did it for 10 days. And hence he received this gift from the spirits to build his teaching lodge, where he knew that his people would be treated in the proper way, only to find out later on the policies of the church, policies of the government was really 360 the other way, right? Harm and abuse. And I always tell people and remind people, Chief Shingwak would never envision where his people would be hurt, right? Or where they'd be abused. And sadly, that is some of the story that people share, right? And so in the spiritual sense, in the sacred sense, we all need to understand what Chief Shingwak's vision truly was. Not Indian residential schools, but a place where you can teach and learn. So as a day school survivor, we didn't actually go to Shingwak Indian residential schools other than to go up there we would be bused, I'm not sure if it was annually or twice a year. And I'll share my experience in that just shortly. But yeah, many stories out of Shingwak Indian residential schools about, the food, the quality of the food, the poor food, how people were treated, how young children were treated. They had to labor a lot of work in terms of the gardens and some of the buildings that were erected. It was very regimental, for sure, and very led by a Christian way of looking at the world, right? And, some of the stories are very horrendous, and I don't want to speak on someone else's story, but just to say this is what I heard. Some had good experiences as well, right? But for the most part, it wasn't a very welcoming place to be, right? And those stories need to be part of the Canadian fabric, right? We need to teach that. It needs to actually become a curriculum where people understand that. For example, if we go to a metropolis like Toronto, who hears this stuff, right? And it's the truth, right? This is the truth. And we need to share that because for Canadians and for new Canadians, they need to understand Canada's true history as well. So I went to the Garden River Indian Day School. It was a Roman Catholic one. And in our community, there were 3 day schools. There were 2 Roman Catholic day schools and there was 1 Anglican. And just in that created division, right? Because it was the Anglicans against the Catholics. And the borderline was the Garden River, the actual bridge at the Garden River. So if you're Catholic, you stayed on the west side, and if you're Anglican, you stayed on the east side. And that was the boundary line early on. I attended the old day school. There were 2 rooms to it, and there was an upstairs and a basement. And that one was run by the nuns, by the sisters. And that's when I first that's when I became uncivilized. That's when I became civilized, because prior to that I was uncivilized, right? I was just carefree young fellow growing up in my community. And then they decided I needed to become civilized, so I went to day school. So I attended 3 years at the old school and 2 years at the new school, which was taught by a teacher from Holland. And for me and for many others that went to school, it was a difficult time because of her accent. It was hard to understand what she was talking about. But it was, and I tried to really, really remember of a happy time being in day school, and I can't find one. you know. I searched my memory hard. When was it happy? It was never happy, because for me it was stand up, sit down, kneel, pray. Stand up, sit down, kneel, pray. Or the daily marches to the church to repent whatever sins that we make as a young child, right? And I had no concept of what this was all about. And I still struggle with that, you know, like what is it, what is that about? Other than the fact that it was drilled into my head that if you don't do what we tell you, you're going to go to this place. You're going to burn forever. And this place was known as hell. And again, it was a concept that I could not understand, although I understand what heat was, and having burnt myself for a few times, like on a hot kettle or whatever, I knew what pain meant, right? But I could never understand this place of hell. That you're going to spend your life forever. Never ever going to this other place that we talk about, this place of everlasting happiness, right? Different concept. And I never understood that. But yet I was forced to try to understand it, right? Because that was the policy. And when I went into the church, what they have on the windows is what they call the Stations of the Cross. And when I looked at that, I thought how harmful people were, how mean people were to this holy person, right? And that he had to carry the burden of the cross, and how he was tortured. And I'm thinking that if God, in their terms, is this kind person, how could he be so mean to this fella who was walking across the earth, right, trying to heal people? And again, I couldn't understand it, but this was a place of prayer, right? A place of prayer, a place of sacredness, and it just never emanated with me. And my experiences as well was as with my other colleagues who went to day school, and we talked about this for sure, is that we were asked to go to confession. And as a young child, I was trying to wonder what sin did I commit, right? But the expectation is that you have to tell the priest your sins, or you're going to go to this place of hell. However, you can rectify it if you tell him your sins, and if you say 4 Hail Marys or 5 Our Fathers, you'll be okay. And so I had no sins, so I ended up telling the priest a lie, right? Because it was expected I had to tell him something. And I felt very awkward going up afterwards to say, those repentance for a lie that I told to the priest. It really didn't connect, right? Didn't make sense to me. But to avoid any other abuse that I may have had to endure, whether it was physical or spiritual abuse, that's what I did to keep myself safe, is to tell the priest a lie. And so that was my experience at day school. And again, I really looked hard to find when did I have a good time? And I never did, right? And as a young boy, I was I was a thin guy growing up, and being bullied out in the playground as well, being picked on, those sort of things. You don't forget, but again, I don't blame those young students at the time, because I think that was the expected behavior that the church and the school and the government wanted us to do, is to fight amongst one another as children, right? And so it wasn't a happy time at all. And they fed us dog biscuits. I remember the nuns asking us to go downstairs, and there were boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes of dog biscuits. And that was our nourishment, right? To bring up we'd have that. And many of us never ate them. We either hid them and threw them out when we were not back in the playground. But literally, they were hard as a rock. They were hard as a rock. And I only found out recently that they are actually dog biscuits, right? They were things that were from the last World Wars that they brought in, and that's what was supposed to sustain us, right? These hard dog biscuits, and hated them. I hated them, but I could still smell them today, and I can still remember the dampness going down into the basement to bring up those boxes of dog biscuits. In addition to that is powdered milk, powdered white milk, and powdered brown milk. I certainly wouldn't encourage that for anyone to come in and to be able to have, right? Because upon reflection today, it's very unhealthy, for anyone. But yet it was expected that that's what we drank, and that's what we eat, right? These boxes of dog biscuits. I think, and Zal was very traumatic, no one wanted those dog biscuits. And the other thing is that what they do is that we would be given cod liver oil. So we'd all stand up in a line. The good days is when they had cod liver oil in tablets, because we'd each get one individually. The difficult days is that when they would just have it in a bottle, and they'd give us the cod liver oil, and it was from the same spoon. So we'd all stand up in line, and we'd get that cod liver oil, and then we move on, all from the same spoon. And again, upon reflection, just unhealthy. So you're thinking of this place that you're going to be taught, you're going to receive an education, you're going to be cared for. It just wasn't there. People didn't care, right? And people were more happy to enforce and impose the policy of government and church rather than take care of us. And that happened in the school. And I had mentioned earlier is that what they would do to us, I'm thinking it's at the beginning of the school year, is that they would take all of us up to Shingwak Indian Residential School. They'd pick us up by bus, and they'd bring us up there. And we didn't know what we were going up there for the first time, but we'd all get off the bus and we'd stand in line and we'd go into the bottom floor. And the first thing that we'd do, of course, we all have our numbers, right, of who we are. I don't remember what my number was. And then you'd line us up, and the first thing that they do is they'd pour powder all over us, white powder, all over our hair, all over our bodies. And I think the idea behind it was to get rid of lice, right? If anybody had lice, whether you had it or not, everyone went through that. And in my story, I suspect it was DDT, right? I truly do. Very harmful for us, but it's something we had to do. And then from that station, we move on to the next station, and everybody would be given x-rays, right? And I think they were looking for TB, because in residential school they're doing the same thing. And if anyone was discovered with TB, they'd be sent to sanatoriums, right? And I think it's just another offshoot to residential schools. But again, it's on reflection, right? In the most unsafe manner. X-rays being taken with everyone in the same room and no protection, right? So did some of our people pass away because they were exposed to this X-ray? I don't know. I can't say that for sure, but it certainly is a possibility, right? And so that was the next station. The next station we went to was to the dentist, and that was a very difficult time because the dentist pulled teeth and checked your teeth and drilled your teeth without any type of Novocaine to prevent any to numb the hurt, and it was painful, right? And again, no care for us as little children, and you remember the pain because it's almost like they jump on your chest and they're painful. And the last station we would go to is that if there was any type of immunization shot that we need to take. And the biggest memory that I have there is the nurse. And the nurse, you could tell from her breath that she was drinking the smell of alcohol on her. And having her administer these immunization shots in that condition, and again, just jabbing us and stabbing us however she wanted, and in some instances, the needles breaking off. So that was what was considered a good time, I guess, for some people. But again, it's not a fond memory for me. It's not a happy time. Never was. You know, like you search and you search and you search and you're trying to find out why this happened, or why did I cause it to happen, right? Blaming myself for what had occurred, and finding no solution, right? And many of us, including me, we started drinking at a very, very young age. Like I'm talking 12, 13 years old, started drinking, right, to move away from those bad memories. That was what we had access to at the time, right? Is alcohol, to try to numb that memory. And later on, it was drugs, right? So marijuana, those type of things. That's where you went because you didn't want to remember those things, right? And that gave us that opportunity for that moment of time to be in a different place, right? You don't remember, so it makes you happy. And yeah, and so it's just that type of behavior wasn't a good behavior, because then some of my friends couldn't let go of alcohol or drugs, right? That was their life. And I'm one of the fortunate ones, because I found a different path later on in life.